yellow.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host. Before we get into today's interview, I want to remind everyone, as always, that our podcast is produced with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Well, my guest today will be Dr. Edwin Leap, who is an emergency medicine physician living with his family in a log house in the very rural northwestern corner of South Carolina. Dr. Leap does locums emergency department work in various hospitals in the area near his home, including the surrounding Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina regions. In addition to those clinical duties, Dr. Leap is a quite prolific writer and blogger. He makes regular contributions to the South Carolina News, as well as monthly columns in the Emergency Medicine News, Medpage Today, and the South Carolina Baptist Courier. You can find his blog at edwinleap.com. He has a really interesting story of how he blends his passion for medicine with his passion for writing. So now let's hear that conversation with Dr. Edwin Leap. So today it's my pleasure to be having a conversation with Dr. Edwin Leap, who is an emergency room physician practicing up in the, in the multi-state area around the northwestern corner of South Carolina. So, Edwin, thank you very much for being with us today, and welcome to Prescription for Success.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Edwin, we talked to a lot of different physicians on the show, and of course, everybody's story is a little bit different. Everybody's a little unique, but I have to say, I think yours is one of the more unique stories that I've dealt with because of the remarkable balance between your clinical and your non-clinical life. And I'm really excited that we're going to get to talk about that today. So, as usual, I think I would like to begin at the beginning. You actually grew up in West Virginia.
I did.
And I'm wondering, were there any medical people in your family? Was that an influence on your decision to become a physician, or did it come from someplace else?
You know, my father's a pastor. He's retired now. And my mother was a nurse for my whole life and actually still has her license.
So you did have some medical influence.
I did, and she very strongly encouraged me into medicine, even when I really had no intention of going into medicine.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know a lot of times people tell me if their fathers were in medicine, and of course, in the not too far distant past, it was largely a male-dominated profession, but many times the father would say, no, I don't think this is something that you want to do because of the demands on time and that sort of thing. But I can see where when someone's coming at it from a nursing perspective, they might have a different feel. Do you think that might have been true in your mother's case?
I never thought about it that way, but I think that's a great point. You know, my dad never tried to suggest or dissuade me from the pastorate. It just wasn't really on my radar. But my mom was very adamant. Well, not adamant, but she was very encouraging by saying, I think you would be a good physician. I think you would be a good physician. And for the longest time, I said, thank you, Mom, but I have zero interest in that. And then suddenly, for whatever reason, while I was in college, I went from a journalism program to a zoology degree. and ended up going to medical school. So you just never know.
So this explains some things. So at the time that you began your undergraduate work, you actually were thinking more in terms of being a writer at the outset. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I wanted to be a magazine journalist, and oddly enough, became one, as it were. Indeed.
But when did the shift happen? When did you start to think, well, maybe you should take a different tack?
It was really my end of freshman, start of sophomore year, and then I really started in earnest taking the classes I needed the spring of my sophomore year, I suppose. No, probably fall of sophomore year, and that's when I started hitting my chemistry and physics prerequisites and all that. So really, about 1 year I had used towards a journalism degree, and then changed.
And eventually finished with a BS in biology, as I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, right. About BS in zoology, because I didn't care for plants, so I just did the animal side. Yeah.
And must have been a pretty good student. You were an honors graduate at Marshall University. Is that right?
I was. Yeah, I was. But it's a funny thing. I was not at all naturally gifted towards science or math, but I just worked really hard. And I put my head down and said, I'm going to do this. And I studied myself silly. And that worked,
Well, that was actually going to be my very next question. Did you find the scientific discipline more challenging? And it sounds like you did, and that you just got to work and did it. Is that kind of the way it was?
That's exactly right. I mean, I enjoy writing a lot, but writing comes very easy for me. I enjoy history, and I'm very good at memorization, and all those sorts of things were a lot of fun to me. I think if I had done that as a major, probably would have been a pretty casual 4 years. But I really had to work extra hard to make the science work, and I did, and I enjoyed it. And to this day, I enjoy knowing what I learned. I enjoy that fund of knowledge and sharing that with my children, two of whom, well, one's a math major and two are biochemistry majors. Another is a firefighter. But anyway, that interest in that sort of thing kind of went on to them as well.
Obviously, with an academic background like that, I'm sure you had no problem getting into medical school and matriculated at West Virginia University. Is that up in Morgantown? Is the medical school in Morgantown?
That is correct. So the medical school is in Morgantown for the first 2 years. Then the class divides, and 1/3 go to Charleston and 2/3 stay in Morgantown. And then there's a med school in Huntington at Marshall, and then there's an osteopathic school in Lewisburg. But I didn't have a problem getting into medical school there. I had a lot of unanswered applications to other schools in other states, but that was okay. I mean, I got into the medical school I wanted to go to, and it worked out fine.
But medical school itself, did you find it particularly challenging, or was it a bit of an effort, sort of like your scientific studies in undergrad?
What I tell people, and I've told my children this when they expressed interest, is that medical school to me is not full of difficult material. It's full of a lot of material. So if you can assimilate a lot of information, you can do it. It's not, I said one of my sons is a math major, and he talks to me about number theory and differential equations and linear algebra and things I really have no idea about and would be very complicated. I didn't think medical school was complicated. I just thought it was overwhelming at times. But I'm gifted with a good memory, and that memory served me well because I can just hold on to things in my head. And I think that's what got me through. And I was willing to work hard, and I was willing to get along with people and do what I was told. And I think that's kind of, where it worked out for me. I didn't think it was technically complex. I mean, some internal medicine is complicated, certainly, but I didn't think so, other than that.
And I want to make sure we stay on the right chronology here. I noticed in your bio that you married your college sweetheart, and did that happen while you were still in college or after you were in graduate school? Or
that was after I graduated from medical school. She was in graduate school at Marshall. She has a master's in counseling. And then the year after that, I graduated. We got married the month I graduated from medical school. So within 1 month, we got married. I graduated. We got married, and we moved to a new town in Indianapolis, and I started residency. on the life stress scale, that's pretty high, I think. We managed to navigate that.
So, and about that decision to go into emergency medicine, how did you come to that decision? If you were, I'm thinking if you were sort of uncertain about whether you were going to go into medicine to begin with, that probably you started medical school without a specific plan for where you would end up, or am I wrong about that?
Somehow in undergraduate, I developed an interest in trauma care. I just thought it was fascinating. And so that was the trajectory I went into thinking about. However, in college, I also worked for an orthopedic group, and I had interest in that. And as you well know, when you go to medical school, often you don't know what you want to do, and you try a lot of things out. And in the end, I realized that I really wasn't a surgeon. I just didn't have the interest in a particular body part or system that I wanted to do that full time, and I didn't like being in the OR. And with all due respect to you as a surgeon, I just didn't enjoy it.
I can't imagine.
It was cold. Yeah, it was cold, and you were there a long time. And I think that, like most people who go into emergency medicine, we have a little bit of ADD, and so we just don't focus well for more than a couple hours on any one thing. And emergency medicine was perfect for that. So you get to do a little trauma, and that's to say you're going to put in chest tubes, you're going to put in central lines, you're going to manage airways, you're going to treat infections, things like that. You're going to deal with fractures, but you're only going to do it for a limited period of time per patient. And I liked being a jack of all trades and master of none. And I thought that's what sort of suited me. And so I was offered at least a 1-year surgery slot in Morgantown, and this wasn't for me. And I realized that I wanted to be doing something where I had a lot of variety, where I had not a lot of continuity. I didn't want to be seeing the same patients for years. I just didn't. And I wanted to have some procedural skills. And somehow deep in my psyche, I needed to learn how to handle medical crises. I don't know if that came from my mother or what. And one time there was a car that crashed in front of our house, and people were screaming, and my mom was running out with a blanket. And I was probably 8 or 9, and somehow I think that got stuck in my head. Now, what do I do if this happens? And there it was. I had to be able to do what was necessary in a crisis for the people I loved and for other people. And that's how I think I got into emergency medicine. Indeed,
there's something about that immediate reward for your actions that's very satisfying, and I think surgeons find that as well.
Absolutely. Well, it's about finding the thing and fixing it.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. And so much of medicine is about finding a thing and saying, "I'm sorry you have this thing, but I can't do a lot about it." And that's very hard for me.
Well, so another interesting facet of your life emerged at about that time. In fact, again, from looking at your CV, it looks like this came up before you were actually in medical school, and that is you signed up for the West Virginia Air National Guard. Is that right, when you were still in undergraduate school?
Actually, it was while I was in medical school. They had a program for medical students. So you would enter as a medical service corps officer, which I did. And as a second lieutenant, which most physicians never get to be. They join as captain, just because of the way the system's set up after medical school. So I did that through the last year and a half of medical school, and in fact, I used about 9 weeks of electives with the Air Force, one for flight medicine and one for my officer's school, and it was wonderful. I had a blast, and the goal was to become a flight surgeon, and I did that, and was a flight surgeon ultimately in Indiana and in the Air Force Reserve in South Carolina. And it was a very rewarding experience. I did not get any college paid for or anything, or medical school paid for. It was what I wanted to do, and I wanted that adventure. My dad was a Vietnam vet, and I think that I just felt a need to kind of honor him and what he had done. And one of my uncles was in the Navy, and it just seemed like the right thing to do, and I enjoyed it tremendously.
And I'm going to bet that experience that you had there was equally as valuable and possibly more valuable from a clinical standpoint from the things that you actually experienced in medical school, or am I wrong about that?
I think it was valuable, but in a more niche way, I suppose, because when I was in residency, we had a a very active air transport system, and I was part of that. So I think that comfort with the aviation environment, that comfort with life support systems, just kind of general knowledge about that, not that I ever needed it, just made for an extra body of knowledge for me and made me comfortable around that world. It was delightful. And now
But particularly in that area of crisis management and disaster management and learning how to prioritize and start with the most urgent and work your way through and that sort of thing. Do you think that was helpful in your military experience?
I think I learned more about that in residency than in the military. In that I was never deployed anywhere, right? I mean, my training, I was always stateside, and I did some training, but I was never. I mean, we did some combat simulation stuff, but ultimately, I learned how to handle that in residency, and in some ways on the helicopter when we would go to these scenes, we would go out to the scenes of car crashes or whatever. And so you had to learn to prioritize and work with EMS and address the airway or whatever needed to be addressed immediately. So that was probably, I think I learned that even more than in the Air Guard. As wonderful as it did not teach me those skills the way residency did.
And you continued your connection with the military or in the reserve for quite a long time, did you not? Like close to 18 years?
Oh, no. It was about, I think it was about a total of 8 years ultimately, because there are times I wish I had, because I would by now have a great retirement built up, but I did not. We were having,
yeah, I guess so.
We were having children, and I was working in a busy practice. I was already working 2 weekends a month, and that was a third weekend a month. And it just didn't, for our lifestyle, it was very difficult at that time with a family. And so I felt it was time to get out. And there are times I've regretted that. I mean, I really enjoyed it. But there are times my wife certainly does not regret it. She's very glad that I didn't stay. Things got a little busy after that, about 2001, as you recall. So I would have taken a lot of trips overseas, I think, if I'd stayed in.
That's very true. So after finishing up residency, and I'm having a little trouble mapping exactly how you did things. I know at some point you began essentially a career that was based on locums assignments, or did you pick a place and stay there for a while? How did that evolve?
So when I left residency, I came to South Carolina and joined a group in a town called Seneca at a hospital called Oconee Memorial, and I was there 20 years in that one practice. It was a fee-for-service group, which are few and far between nowadays, and so we contracted with the hospital. We managed our own billing. We managed our own staffing. It was wonderful. And then about 20 years into that, I just needed a change of pace, and I did locums for a few years, and that was delightful. Honestly, I enjoyed the fact that I had enormous control of my schedule. So if I didn't want to work a weekend or a holiday or a birthday, I didn't work it. And that makes
That's a great deal.
It makes locums wonderful, although you become kind of hated by other people who aren't doing locums when you work on that side. But I needed that. I needed that change of pace. And I think that it was very curative for me for some sort of burnout I had cooking up. My wife says it really changed my attitude because that control is great. We so often in medicine nowadays, we have so little control, and that was great to have it. In fact, my wife and I took the kids on a 3-week vacation to the beach, and we realized that in like 20 years, we had never slept in the same bed for 3 weeks in a row. I mean, what an interesting revelation that working nights and weekends and holidays does that sort of thing to your lifestyle. So that was a real interesting thing. And then I took a couple more regular jobs. I was a director for a little while. I did some locums locally where I could drive and come home at night. And then I worked in Newberry, South Carolina more recently, where I was as an employment position. But I've seen a lot of medicine from a lot of different perspectives, and that's been a great thing for me as a writer to see the world of a private practice, the world of a locum, the world of an employee, the world of working for large corporations. That's been an interesting way to see the many facets of what different physicians do.
Yeah, that really is a perspective that very few of us get to see, and I'm sure it has enhanced your writing career quite a bit. And that's the area that I would like to go to next, because it clearly is a substantial focus of yours, and that is your writing. Is that, and you're really prolific now. I'll let you talk about the number of publications that you write for in your blog and that sort of thing. But were you from the outset, maybe even back into medical school and residency, were you already contributing your writings, or is it something that evolved later? Tell us that story.
I was not doing that at all. When I was in high school, I was a good writer, and my teacher sort of encouraged me to do that, and we talked about college and journalism, but I wasn't contributing. And even in medical school, it really was not a thing that I did. I might write some for myself, but I didn't contribute to anything else. I would read. And then after residency, it's an interesting thing. We started to have children. I just started to write again. Just all these emotions and events and things I wanted to remember kind of erupted out of this well inside me. And the first thing that happened in terms of contributing was really interesting. I wrote a couple of articles about Christmas. Well, one was about Christmas and one was about how everyone seems to have chest pain in the ER. And I kind of reflected on that. And I sent it to the local newspaper, which is actually a Gannett publication in Greenville called the Greenville News. And the editor said, I like this. I'll run it. And he said, if you have something else, send it to me sometime. And then he said, hey, would you like to write something monthly? And I'll pay you. I said, well, that's every writer's dream. Sure. And then it turned into, would you like to write something twice a month? And we'll pay you. I said, well, sure. That's even better. And so for a long time, and I wrote about once or twice a month for the Greenville News for about 23 years.
So you were sort of recruited into it. That's how it began, as opposed to just waking up one day and saying, hey, I'd like to write for somebody.
Well, yeah, sort of. I mean, I sent this to them because I wanted to have a statement I wanted to make, but then it became, hey, we like what you're doing. Why don't you send us more? And then in 2000, the same sort of thing happened with a publication called Emergency Medicine News, and that's a Lippincott publication. I sent them this column called, I think it was called The White Knights of Medicine. It was about what people do in the emergency department day and night, trying to encourage other doctors. And the editor read it and she said, I like this a lot. Would you like a monthly column? So, well, sure, I'll do that. And so that was originally called Second Opinion. And then a few years ago, we changed it over to a title of Life in Emergistan, as if the emergency department is a separate world, a different country called Emergistan. And I've had a lot of fun doing that. And kind of just playing off of that trope of Emergistan. And so things like that have happened. So those columns then have been picked up over the years by Kevin Foe at Kevin MD, and he's run a lot of my columns over the years. And I started submitting to other places like Huffington Post at one point and had some things there. And at one point, something I had written in Emergency Medicine News was sent to James Dobson at Focus on the Family. And he said, hey, I really like this. Can we run it? And I said, yes, sir, absolutely. And that turned into me writing for their publication called Physician Magazine for a while until they closed that publication for sort of reasons. And so I've written for them, and then for the South Carolina Baptist Courier, where I sent them. I can't remember how that happened. If I wrote to them or they wrote to me, I think I wrote to them, and I've been writing for them for probably 15 years. More recently, a health column called Wholly Healthy, WHOLLY, kind of wordplay. It's a monthly column on some small health topic. It's about 500 words is the word limit on the high end. And I probably get more comments on that column than anything I write in the area. It's so funny. So often as a writer or as a musician or a painter, the things that you're like, oh, this is okay. I don't think it's great. Other things that people really like, I think it was Tchaikovsky didn't really like 1812 Overture, but everybody loved 1812 Overture. So he said, well, okay, I guess that's how it's going to be. And so over the years, it's just been a matter of, in many ways, of submitting things. And I was contacted by the editor of Medpage Today, and we about some things I'd written, and now I have a sort of web page there at Medpage Today called Rural Prescription or Rural RX that I write for some about once a month. Although I've been a little slack lately, I hope the editor forgives me. So it's been an interesting process, and there are a lot of things I'd like to write about. I'd like to write fiction or short stories. I'd like to write poetry. I do some of that, but I've never published any of that sort of thing. My dream has always been to be a syndicated writer because I think that physicians who write about medicine frequently write about medicine. So it's about, what's the best statin for me, or what about my hypertension? And that's okay. And I do that for the Baptist Courier, and it's rewarding. There's a lot about the world that you see through the medical lens that needs to be said. And because you and I are on the forefront of a lot of social changes, a lot of cultural changes, a lot of scientific changes, and we see a lot of see into the soul of humanity. See a lot of pathos that you can write about. And what are the effects of these things? I mean, I don't think people get to hear about that nearly enough, and I'd like to have more opportunity to write about that because there's just so many things I see every day. I mean, we could talk about the opioid epidemic. We could talk about broken families. We could talk about depression and anxiety all day long because that's what I see every single day.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Let's face it, there are a lot of people, particularly for the news services, that are writing about these issues, and they have seen very little of it from the inside. And I should think as an emergency room physician, you're in a great place to see a whole lot of it from the inside, because many times these people with problems end up in your space, right?
That's right. Because it's very easy as a physician to get frustrated with that, but frequently there's absolutely no other place for them to go. So you can talk about mental health care. They can't go to the mental health clinic for the most part. They certainly can't afford a psychiatrist. And so they go to the place that's open 24 hours where someone will actually talk to them. And that's what we've become. I remember many years ago reading a little blog post written by John Piper, the pastor. I think probably know who he is. And he said he was asked to go see a young woman in the ER who was a cutter. She would cut herself, not suicidally, just cut herself. And he said, "Tell me why you cut." And she said, "I like it when the doctors and nurses touch me." And I've always thought that was a very profound thing, that so often as frustrated as we get in medicine, we both know that many of the things that show up as medical pathology are really psychosocial events. And people just need a little attention, and nobody else will listen to them anywhere else. A PA I worked with one time was very insightful. He said, "I think, Ed, that people come to the ER because it's the only place in the world they have any control." And that was also insightful.
That's an interesting concept. In fact, I think I'm going to use that as a cue to let you talk about that subject some more. One of the, I don't know where this particular blog appeared, but this is your work. And it's entitled, "What If People Behave Outside the ER as They Do Inside the ER?" You remember that one?
I do. And I will tell you, that's interesting. I wrote that in frustration one day. And that on my own website, my blog gets about 5,000 visitors a month. And that got about 95,000 visits. I mean, I was gobsmacked when I was like, really? And I went to my web guy. I said, "Is this real? Is this some sort of just bot issue?" He said, "No, I think it showed up looks like it showed up on Facebook and people read it." So, I mean, how about that? Was just an odd thing. And it expresses a lot of the frustration that medical staff feel, because we know there's been a lot of violence against physicians and nurses in the last few years. And, hospitals have initiatives to stop violence, and it still happens. And we find that there are people that come there that really just need to be comforted. And then there are people there that really just need to be in jail sometimes. And they come in, they're threatening, they're loud, they're dangerous, and it's and they're often rude to the nursing staff, or they say inappropriate things to the female nurses, or they're immediately threatening lawsuits, so it's it's very hard at times to sort of switch from deep compassion to is this dangerous mode, and you have to do that. You have to make that change on a dime. Is this person here because they really need my help, or is this person here because they really want Dilaudid and they're going to do anything to get it? And so that column kind of reflected that frustration that people will do so many things in our setting that they won't other places. Now, people wrote to me in response and said, in the retail world, you'll be surprised what people do in malls and businesses and restaurants. And I have no doubt. But the difference is, in the hospital, they're covered by EMTALA. So federal law says we have to take care of them regardless. You can actually ask the police to take them out of your business. It's much harder to do that in the hospital because, we talk about jail clearances. They'll immediately say, "Oh, I have chest pain. I can't go to jail."
Well, I thought it was very profound and really made a powerful statement about how people behave when they have frustrations that they just can't take anyplace else.
That's right. They do. And I think some of that really needs enormous compassion. And as I've often told medical students and residents, I've said, sick people can be crazy and crazy people can be sick. And it's very hard sometimes to tease that out. So what you have to do is you have to take everyone very seriously the first couple times, because that chest pain may very well be true cardiac ischemia, or it may not be, right? By the time you've seen them 7 times and they've already had a cardiac cath, you can start to say, look, I'm pretty sure this is not nothing to worry about. But on first pass, we have to take all those folks and all their sort of dysfunction seriously. And it's interesting. A friend of mine works in palliative care in Canada, and she was talking one time about the people that we see who, and I'm sure you've seen them, who scream and cry when you put an IV in them, and you're like, oh, come on, you've got tattoos, you obviously you shoot up heroin. We know that the needles are no big deal. Well, she said in studies, people who've been sexually abused have exaggerated thalamic response to pain.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. So
it's a physical sign. It's something that you pay attention to on the physical exam. Yeah.
Right. So here's a young woman who's screaming because you stick a needle in her arm and you don't understand. It may be a sign of abuse. How about that? I mean, I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah.
And I've tried to keep that in mind ever since then when my nurses get frustrated and say, look, maybe this is more than just her being dramatic.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, thought so too.
All right. I'm going to ask you to talk about one other thing that was not part of your writing. This is something that you talked about, or you may have written about it someplace and I didn't find it, but you talked about this in a brief podcast that I uncovered as I searched my way through your life. But you were talking about your first experience with the malpractice suit. And I was really impressed with the rather logical and sort of business-like approach or attitude that you had to that. It was sort of like, this is just one of the things that we do, and there's no reason to get particularly excited about it. I found that to be profoundly different from most physicians that I've known that found themselves as a defendant. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I've had one suit so far, which I think is, in emergency medicine, nothing short of miraculous.
I'll say.
But it's interesting how I going through the process was frustrating and it made me angry, but it didn't devastate me. And I think it's because my wife was so supportive of me, and it didn't change my life dramatically. I didn't lose my job over it. I think it's very important for us to keep in mind that it is just what I said, and that is this is not intentional malice on the part of the attorney. This is his job. It's a transaction. It's a form of wealth transfer. For patients, it's often it's just a way of, or family members, it's often a way of, trying to get some closure on a thing that they don't understand and that they didn't have any control over themselves, maybe. And so they're trying, fortunately, we don't do trial by combat or duels or blood feuds in America today, which would be the other way. So a lawsuit is a way to mitigate that sort of behavior on the parts of families. And so better that than violence, better that than revenge. And so I think that as bad as it is, as frustrating as it is, lawsuits serve that purpose. So I think it's critical for physicians to remember that, their identity is not completely wrapped up in being a physician. That's really hard because we go to medical school and residency and all these things, and we're so driven that physician becomes the thing that's most important about who we are. And that's toxic on many levels, interpersonally and professionally in all sorts of ways, but particularly when the lawsuits come, because the lawsuit comes and the complaint makes you sound like a monster, and you come to believe, wow, I'm really bad. I made a mistake, or I didn't make a mistake, but it looked like a mistake. So the person I am as a physician is compromised, and therefore I'm bad. And that's why I think, rates of suicide go up with lawsuits. And the point I think it's important to make to people is you'll, as a physician, have done far more good than any harm you caused over the course of a career. And that matters enormously. And I think it also matters that your identity be focused in places, not just in medicine, but in your family, in your faith or philosophy, in other things that you do besides just that I'm a physician. And I think that the most anxious and miserable physicians are often the ones for whom that's the principal identity that they carry around in life. And you know them. When you meet them, they never call themselves by their first name. They're always Dr. X or Dr. Y, no matter what. If they're renting a car, oh, it's Dr. Jones. Okay, that's fine, except what if Dr. Jones gets paralyzed? I mean, what if Dr. Jones loses his license through no fault of his own, through a complaint? These things happen, and that's where the problem happens, is your identity becomes too wrapped up in that. We do it to ourselves because we make it so competitive. And our families in some ways do it too, right? Our parents are like, oh, I'm so proud of my son. He's a physician. She's a physician. That becomes a thing that seems to matter most to the people around us. And that's unfortunate because it can be such a hard path. And also there are times when physicians just say, I can't do it anymore. I can't be a doctor now. Then what happens to who they are? But particularly in the lawsuit realm, when you're being sued, you have to step back and go, this is a transaction. B, it may have been a mistake, but mistakes are what happened to humans with limited capacity. We don't know everything. And the other thing that I've said before, I think it matters to some people, is to say a mistake, even in my practice event, is not a sin. It's simply a mistake. It's not a moral failure. It might be a cognitive error. It might be a systems error. It might be something like that. But it's not a sin. It's not a moral failing. That's a key point.
Well, that's a very profound and I think very wise way to look at that issue because, as you know, and as most of our listeners know, if you are a physician, there is a very high likelihood that you will face a lawsuit at some point. And if you allow it to become too personal, it can do a great deal of damage to you. And I think your way of looking at it is a really wise and helpful way to do that. And I hope you'll do some more writing about that because I think some people could definitely stand to try to learn a little bit more about that particular point of view.
Well, thank you. I may do that. And my wife and I have talked about doing some sort of physician family wellness podcasts or videos or something like that. And I think it's important because those suits not only affect the physician, they affect the family. And when the physician starts to unravel, he or she can become angry, sullen, depressed, anxious, suicidal. They can abuse substances. All that trickles down to all the family members. And it's key that you learn to interdict that before it happens.
Well, again, thank you for putting that out there. And again, I would very much like to see some more on the subject.
Thanks. I'll do that.
That said, what I would like to do at this point is go ahead and move into probably my favorite part of the show. I don't know if I have favorite parts or not, but I like this part because this is when I get to hear a lot about what my guests are really all about. And that's where we invite you to give us your prescription for success. So if you're ready, I will just sit quietly and Dr. Edwin Leap will recite for us his prescription for success.
Very good. Well, when you asked me to do a prescription for success and to try to sort of boil that down, that's a daunting thing because over the course of a practice, a lot of things matter to a successful practice. But I'm going to kind of step aside a little bit and say we all know that good science and good knowledge and good medicine, these are things that are kind of foundational. I mean, I could say learn a lot and be technically proficient. Of course, I think that's a given to me. So I focused in a different direction, and so here's my prescription for success. And number one, for physicians, you should have a theology or philosophy beyond scientism, because you will see a lot of suffering and have struggles, and you'll need a way to understand and endure those things. Money and position are poor comforts in hard times, whether those hard times mean physical illness or depression or substance abuse or lawsuits or loss of loved ones. Those are things that will happen, and you will certainly have to try to bring comfort to other people and be the person who brings calm and healing or comfort in terrible situations. So it's important to have something that speaks to you that's beyond the mere willingness to say, oh, I'm a scientist, I'm a physician. I think a theology or philosophy is critical. Number two, focus on your marriage and children, because without that, your career will be misery. With that improper focus, the job matters far less. Remember that your wife is wiser than you think, and that she is better at viewing the big picture of your life together. This also is true for female physicians and their husbands. Listen to that spouse and make their dreams as important as your own, and make them more important than your job. Furthermore, your children want you more than things or status. And you'll never look back and wish you had fewer children, by the way. You should always have children and make family key. The idea that your children need you to work nonstop so they can go to Yale, that's really not the most important thing in their world. They want your presence. And finally, number 3 is find the best mixture of wellness and money. And if the job isn't what you want or need, or what your family wants or needs, then you should leave. Remember the sunken cost fallacy, which is that you can put all sorts of time and money into a thing thinking that will ultimately pay off, and it may just not. That's a very poor summation of the sunken cost fallacy. You can look it up. But the point is, not everything will pan out well in the end if you stick with it and you're miserable. Whatever you make, especially if it seems like a lot, you'll always earn it, financially that is. And you'll usually earn it the hard way. So make sure that what you're making is important and worth it and valuable, and that your reward is not just money. Because honestly, I think that time is a currency. And if you can be rewarded with more time and still get by financially, you'll be a happier person. And those are my 3 prescriptions for success.
Well, Dr. Edwin Leap, thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you for sharing that wisdom. Those are really some profound thoughts, and I'm delighted that you took the time to be with us today. And before we go, I would like for you to take the opportunity to tell our listeners how to follow you, where they can find you. Tell us about the websites, the blog, and anything that you would like for us to go to see what you're up to. Please let us know right now.
All right, thank you. So I am on Twitter at Edwin Leap. My website, or that's my blog, that is www.edwinleap.com. You can also look up Edwin Leap on LinkedIn. You can also go to Medpage Rural Prescription, that is RURALRX on Medpage, where I have a site there. You can find me by searching my name on Kevin MD. And you can also find me if you go to Emergency Medicine News under Collections, and the collection of my columns is called Life in Emergistan. So those are the places you can find a lot of my material, and I certainly hope you'll stop by. I'd love to have you read my material and comment or leave insights or things you'd like to see me write about, or anything like that. And it's great to have you. And Randy, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Well, once again, it's been an absolute delight. I'm sure that of the people that stop in and hear the podcast, we're going to create a good many visitors to your various sites, because you have quite a bit to say. And once again, thank you very much for sharing your story and sharing your thoughts with us, Edwin. And good luck to you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Have a great day.
And that brings us to the close of another episode of Prescription for Success. Don't forget, you can subscribe to our podcast and get more information about our guests by reviewing the show notes on our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And while you're there, be sure to leave us a comment or ask us a question. We'll be reading those on the air from time to time. And finally, if you'd like to help support the show and gain access to members-only content, you can become a patron by visiting patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. Thank you very much for listening today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.